Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hi, I'm Banana. Thank you so much again for having me.
Always a pleasure. Uh, yes, today we're going to talk about Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, a tabletop role-playing game. How would you describe this game exactly?
So, Jiangshi Blood in the Banquet Hall is a tabletop role-playing game where the players are a family. They're a Chinese American family or a Chinese Canadian family who are running a restaurant. And so, in the daytime, you're running the restaurant, and it's also the 1920s. So you're faced with oppression and all the weird things that come with running a small business in the daytime in the 1920s. And at night, hopping vampires, these energy-sucking vampires come out and you have to fend yourself from these supernatural horrors.
Where did the idea for this game come from? I mean, you got the 1920s, you got a restaurant setting, and you got vampires. How did that all come together?
Yeah, so Senful Lim and I, we actually started working on this in 2018. So in 2018, we started chatting. We were like, "Hey, let's start working together on something." And so we have a Google Doc where we just dumped like a whole lot of stuff onto. We were just like, "Here are all the things that we're interested in," and one of them was connecting with our Chinese American backgrounds slash Chinese Canadian backgrounds. And so we wanted to make something that was like very close and very personal. And something that we're both interested in was food, right? So we had spent a lot of time in restaurants, not necessarily like working at them because neither of us come from restaurant families, but we were really interested in the idea of like, maybe playing in that setting and playing with something that we were both really familiar with. So that was one of the key elements to the game itself. From there, we sort of talked a little bit about like what was the history like why are so many Chinese people in the States or Canada, like why is it such a prevalent thing for so many people to run Chinese restaurants? Because like both of us, we have we have friends or maybe we have family who have a restaurant, and so it just like sort of became this thing where it's just like we were asking ourselves a lot of questions based on like why is this such a prominent thing. And so we did some research, and it all came down to like the Chinese Exclusion Act, and we just like went down this rabbit hole of like, oh wow, there's actually like a reason why like a lot of people ended up running restaurants because like they didn't have a lot of other jobs back then for Chinese Americans or Chinese immigrants in general. Specifically in the U.S., there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. In Canada, we have like a whole section on Chinatowns in the book as well. But our main focus, where we first started, was the immigration into San Francisco. And so from there, we just like did more research on that, and we were thinking about like what is this like manifest into, right? Like the anxiety of being an outsider, the anxiety of being othered. Like, what does that look like? Okay, so what if it's a paranormal thing? What if it's a Jiangshi? And so we started thinking about that, and that's sort of where it came into being. So it was like a long process of like exploration and discovery.
So I'm curious, how did the vampire aspect come into play?
Oh, so it's a physical manifestation of like the anxieties and the fears and all of these things that come with like either like feeling excluded or feeling marginalized, and also like in the 1920s it wasn't like the best time for people of color, and so we were using it as a metaphor.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. So in this game, uh, who can you be exactly? Like, are you members of a family that's running a restaurant?
Yes, yes. So you actually play the family who are running the restaurant. And over time, if you don't succeed very well at roles, or if your roles, don't go the way that are planned, you take on damage. And so as you take on stress or physical damage or psychic damage, stuff on your character sheet actually gets covered up by cards. And so these cards, they could be Jiangshi cards or they could be Meng cards. So Meng cards are like nightmares, and then Jiangshi cards are Jiangshi cards. So as you cover them up, you start basically like taking on more and more traits of a Jiangshi. So like once everything has been covered up on your character sheet, you can't use any of the items, you can't use any of your skills, you can't use any of your facets, but you take on these supernatural abilities. So characters can't die in the game. They can turn into Jiangshi, or sorry, PCs can't die, so player characters can't die, but they turn into Jiangshi, and you can heal them back, of course, with the consent of the player. If the player wants to play a Jiangshi, that's totally fine as well, because I'm sure that like a lot of people love playing supernatural horrors.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's sort of how it works.
So how does the mechanics of the game work exactly? Is it dice? I heard cards.
Yes, there are dice, and so the game itself is very tabletop board game inspired, because Sen Lim, he has a lot of background in board games, right? So he did junk art and a whole bunch of other games in the board game sphere. I do a lot of board game publishing. And so both of us wanted something tactile. So we wanted to take some tactile elements from board games and introduce that into tabletop role playing and make it feel like it's easy to understand like what's happening, and have like have visual elements and tactile elements for players to play from, basically. And so when we first started designing this game, we wanted something that was very much inspired from our Chinese backgrounds. And so we were experimenting with these divination tools called jiaobei, and they're like these moon blocks. They're like these red wooden moon blocks. And as we were playing around with them, we discovered that A, they're very expensive to manufacture, and B, they're also not very good in terms of like in a game sense. So like if you're rolling them or like playing with them, chances of getting like a certain outcome are pretty slim. And so we decided, okay, let's just stick with dice. And so we moved to D8s. And so you're rolling from a pool of D8s. And the four is basically, anytime you roll a four, it cancels out the highest number. And so your next highest number would be the outcome. So for example, if you rolled, say 3d8s or 4d8s, and you get like a 1, a 2, like a 6 and a 7, or sorry, a 4 and a 7. The 4 would cancel out the 7, and then your highest roll would therefore be a 2. And so it's like a dice pool system. And if you fail a roll, the GM would give you an extra dice to your own individual pool. So you would have individual dice to spend as well.
Oh, okay. So this is a box set, is it? Or is it a book?
It's a box set, yes.
Oh, okay. So when someone gets it, what's inside exactly?
So there's a lot of stuff, actually. So let's start with the art prints. So you get 2 art prints. I believe one of them is by Kwanchai Moria, because Kwanchai did the cover of the book and the box. The second art print, I believe, is from Stephen Wu, who is our other artist who was working on the interior art and the cover for the scenario booklet. You also have the rule book. So the rule book has everything in it, basically tells you how to play. You have your scenario book, which I believe has it has a bunch of different scenarios in it. I have to like remember how many exactly. I think it's 14 or 16. It's an even number, but it's a lot of scenarios. And in the scenario book, it gives you basically scenarios not just from like, from a Chinese American background. It also has like other POC written rules and scenarios from their own backgrounds. So we have those. We have a deck of Hmong cards. We have a deck of Jiangshi cards. We have a deck of restaurant cards, because the restaurant itself is also a character. So we also have like a restaurant board. Character, I say that loosely, as in anytime you don't manage your chores, the restaurant itself also takes, it's not damage, it's called neglect. So if you don't take care of the restaurant, it starts falling into neglect. And as it falls into neglect, if you cover all the slots on the restaurant, it'll stop giving you, cool abilities and modifiers, and it'll also fall into decay. And that's one of the ways that the game can end. So the first way that the game can end is if all players are like, okay, we're done playing, like, the scenario's over, let's do something else. The second way that, the game can end is by the restaurant falling into decay. So we have a restaurant board, we have the restaurant cards, it's got all the chores on it, it's got an X card, we have 3 types of dice. So you have gold dice, and you have red dice, and you have 1 white die. So the 6 gold dice are D8s. The 6 red dice are also D8s. And the white die is a D4. And that is specifically for you to roll when you're collecting Hmong cards between days. And if you say you roll a 1, you get 1 Hmong card, so on and so forth. It also comes with 4 character sheets that are dry erase. And so we have dry erase markers in the box as well. So players can just if they don't like something on their character sheet, or they're playing a character and now they're, switching over to something else or a different scenario, they could just erase everything and then redo their character sheets. We also have a pad of spirit paper. And that is just a pad of paper where basically one of the mechanics in the game is players will basically they'll come together as a family, and the GM will count down in their head, counting down from 10. And the players will have to come up with a sentence or a phrase or a motto that best describes what keeps their family together. And if they succeed, then they can power through and use the spirit paper to go against the Jiangshi. And if they can't do it, then they can't use the spirit paper within the allotted time frame. But usually I feel like it's okay for GMs to count slower than they actually should, or just not count at all, just for, it just builds up that intensity. So yeah.
I love box sets, and although I still love, of course, RPG books. What made you decide to go in that route, as make this into a box set than a handbook?
It was a lot of things. So I think one of the elements to this was the tabletop element, right? So the tabletop board game element, where we were just okay, we love board games. We want it to be tactile. We want all these cards. And so the cards were important to us. And also having the dry erase markers, because we just we love character sheets and we love having them. It's just that they get so cluttered. For me especially, it's just okay, I don't feel like printing stuff off. I'm okay with printing them off if I need to, but in this case, it's just a convenience type of thing, an ease of use for the user. And so we were thinking a lot about the end user, the end customer, how are they going to manage this box set? Are they going to keep printing stuff off all the time? And so we were thinking about that, and we wanted to make it easier for the customer or the user or the player. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted it to be in a box set. We also just wanted everyone to have all of the stuff, so that they have all the different scenarios there with them, and they have the rule book, and they have everything there. So that's sort of the reasoning behind the box set. Also, it's 3.5 pounds. It's a ridiculous monster.
Let's talk about the artwork. I love the cover art for the box.
Thank
it's
you.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
What can you talk a little bit about the art direction behind it?
Oh yeah. So we worked with Quan Chai, and he is a fantastic artist. So we actually had a bunch of different artists for this game. So Quan Chai, who did the artwork for the cover of the box, he has done work for Dinosaur Island and several other board games. So he's pretty well established in board games. And so when we reached out to him, we were like, hey, I know you're really busy. Would you be interested in doing a cover? And he's also Chinese. So he was just yeah, of course we had to convince him. We had to pitch the idea to him first, because it doesn't take a lot of, he doesn't take a lot of projects all the time. And so once he heard the pitch, he was just oh yeah, definitely. This is definitely really interesting to me. So yeah, I'll work on this. And so the process behind that was, he basically gave us 2 sketches, and we told him all the stuff that we really liked. We had some touchstones for artists as well. We just had some art pieces that we were thinking about, and we shared all of this in a vision board. We were just this is all the stuff that we think is really cool. go for it. And so he went and did the two sketches, showed us two sketches. We loved both of them, but we ended up choosing this one. And from there, we just like, went back and forth on edits. He colorized it and everything. And yeah, it's gorgeous. I love it.
What type of game master tools do you have in there to help says game masters understand the time period, the setting, what's going on in the world around the restaurant? What does the box set have to offer?
Yeah. So in the core rule book, there are a bunch of different chapters. So one of the chapters basically outlines the history of. It gives you like a timeline, basically, of the 1800s to, or the late 1800s to the time period that you're playing in, which is the 1920s. So it sort of gives you an idea of what has happened between the start of the Chinese immigration like into the U.S. To like the Chinese Exclusion Act, to like all the stuff that's happened to like San Francisco's Chinatown, and to like the actual game. So it gives you a timeline of that. It also gives you an idea of like what the other Chinatowns in different places were like. So we have Vancouver, we have Toronto, I believe, we have San Francisco and New York, and like a little bit of history in there. We hired Ross Chung, we hired Daniel Kwan, we asked Kiana Shaw to like, all these really like awesome people in the industry to like write and work with us. And we were lucky enough that they were just like, yes, we'll do it. So we're really lucky in that regard. And so we worked together with them to build the section out. In terms of like actual role playing stuff, we made sure we had a section on how to role play as a Chinese person. So like, if you're playing a Chinese character, like how do you do that respectfully, and how do you do that without, trying to like make it too stereotypical or anything like that. Obviously, people are going to make mistakes, right? Like everyone's going to make mistakes, but the matter of it's all a matter of like learning from those mistakes and not being too hard on yourself while still improving and still being understanding to like all the people around you, right? So we worked with James Mendez Hodes on that, because when we initially wrote out the rule book, we were just like, okay, like I feel like Sen and I, we were both feeling like we were probably missing something, like we don't know how to like carry forth on this. And so we talked to James Mendez Hodes, and Mendez, he was great. He was just like, actually, I think you need this section, like let's work on this section together. And so we went back and forth on building out the section on how to play a Chinese character respectfully. We also worked with one of my friends who actually, her grandfather used to own a Chinese restaurant in New York. And so I started talking to her. We hired her on to do consulting for doing, for what it's like to run a restaurant, basically. Like, what was a Chinese restaurant? What did it look like? What they serve? Like, what was it basically like in the it was like, I think it was like the mid 1900s. And so like I went back and forth with her. Her name's Sammy Lai, and we just like talked about it. She helped us write out a section as well. We talked to Aaron Catanoseas, who also helped us with writing out a section on how to role play as a service industry worker. And so he actually works as a service industry worker. So we wanted his experience, and we wanted it to be like sort of like in a modern sense. So because he's doing it currently, we just wanted to get his idea, his ideas, his take, and integrate that into the book. So that way, players, you're basically playing, people who are, who could be doing real things, right? These are like real, not like that they're real people. They are fictional people, but you are still taking on like, people who are doing like, real life things. So we wanted to be respectful in that regard. And we wanted to make sure that like, players understand what they're getting themselves into. And we have a whole section on, setting expectations, making sure that, you use your X card if you're comfortable with it, integrating lines and veils, all the calibration tools, and making sure that, players know that they're there to build a story together. It's a collaborative experience. It's not, one against the other. It's all, everyone's there to make a fun story.
If I may ask, I noticed that like for Ravenloft, you also wrote about Jiangshi and also I think in one of our discussions we talked about like Mr. Vampire. I believe that's the name of
Yes.
the title. Yes, and we talked about how about that movie. Um, what is it about these creatures that fascinate you so much?
So I actually co-designed Jiangshi with Sen before I started working on Ravenloft. And so after we kickstarted Jiangshi, Wes actually reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to write a thing for Ravenloft and have it be about Jiangshi?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah, totally." And so I feel like that was sort of the jump into it, but also like I love the creature itself. Like I love this idea of like a hopping corpse, because that's what they are. They're just like hopping corpses, and they're just like stealing energy from people. In later iterations, they start, sucking blood and doing all of that stuff. But that's because like I think like Cantonese horror at the time, it was like a lot of martial arts films. They were doing like they were into like, the Jiangshi, like that phase, right? So they were doing that. And they were like adding a little bit more of like the Western vampire into the take, where they're just like, hey, like let's have them suck blood this time. Like let's integrate that in. And so you later on see like iterations of that. But I feel like I really like love these movies because they're comedic. It's like a comedic take on horror. Like I love like What We Do in the Shadows. I love Shaun of the Dead, Mr. Vampire, Spooky Encounters. They're all like very silly movies, and they're all like about a scary thing. Like the scary thing, it happens to hop, which is like the most ridiculous thing. And like seeing it in action is just like really sort of like you're poking fun at the supernatural, and it's terrifying, right? But at the same time, it is like, this unknown, this like undead unknown thing. And so you do have to be careful of it. So I think that's like one of the reasons why I love this creature.
So this box is now out, right? It was on Kickstarter and now it's available for
Yes.
purchase. Where can people find it?
So I believe we are still fulfilling it out to our backers. So people are still receiving in the mail, but a few stores are carrying it now. We are doing distributions through a few of our distributors and wholesalers, but we are trying to move towards online retail. So once everyone's gotten their box set, once everyone's gotten all their stuff, we're going to have everything up on the website, and it should be www.gameandacurry.com, where we're going to be selling copies.
Oh, excellent. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you want to share about this project?
Oh, I know I mentioned Quan Chai earlier. I do also want to mention like we have a whole bunch of other artists on the team, and we also worked with a lot of other people, a lot of writers in the core rulebook. So in the core rulebook, we also worked with Lucian Khan, Janaea Kemper on basically writing out like the social groups. So there are there's a whole chapter on like different social groups of the time. And so we wanted to include definitely like, all the different people that lived in Chinatown, but also like what's it like throughout the rest of, for example, San Francisco, right? And so like, what was it like being a person of color, just hanging out in San Francisco in the 1920s? And so we wanted to get a little bit of their take on their history, and just write that out, right? So we were privileged enough to like work with them on writing that section out. We also worked with a whole bunch of artists. Stephen Wu, I already mentioned. Stephen Wu did a majority of the art. So all of the interior art for, I believe, both the books. He also did the cover for the scenario book, like I mentioned. And we also worked with Joanne St. Laurent, who did a piece for the scenario book. We worked with Jabari Weathers, who did some of the cards. We worked with Sadia Bees, who we had on before on the show, who I was working on Suburban Consumption with. And we have and my friend Robert Richburg, who I met through art school. So he did a few pieces for us as well for the cards.
Oh,
And I
excellent.
think Yeah, I think that's everyone. I know it's a lot of people. But I counted the other day like how many people we had on the team exactly. We have 32, not including the publishers and Sen and me. So yeah, 32 people in total. And also Amanda Call and Noel Tien Nguyen. So Noel Tien worked on a couple of the pieces inside the book, and Amanda Call did a map basically for the restaurant, so that way people can visualize like what it looks like.
Oh, okay. If I may ask, is there any tentative plans for a sequel of sorts?
We are thinking about it. We are doing a few things behind the scenes that we can't exactly talk about, but there are some hopefully big things that are coming our way.
Okay, okay, excellent. I won't press about it. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about it. I'm really excited. I can't wait to see it in my store. Take care, and we'll see you next time.